So last week I was explaining the distribution theory. I'll continue from where I had left last week. So rising of factors of production, I had mentioned this, the importance and the two theories that we are going to deal with. One is the marginal productivity theory, and the other one is the demand and supply theory. So I had stopped at this point, right? So today, let me start with the marginal productivity theory. You know what is marginal? Marginal is additional, and marginal analysis was the economist who proposed this and who actually is the person behind this marginal analysis was Alfred Marshall. Okay, so marginal productivity theory. What could be marginal productivity? It is the additional output or it is the additional returns you get by using one more unit of the input, additional unit of the resource. Okay, so marginal productivity means additional production or additional revenue obtained by employing an additional unit of the factor. So marginal productivity of a factor of production, that is any resource, factor of production. It could be land, it could be labor, it could be capital, or it could be management or organization. So marginal productivity of a factor of production is the addition made to total output. So if you add one more unit of the input, then if you get additional output, it would be added to the total output. So marginal productivity of a factor of production is the addition made to total output by the employment, by the use of the marginal unit of factor, that is the additional unit of the input. Example, labor. So if wage, that is the marginal factor cost, that is the additional cost that a farmer has to incur to use or apply one more unit of the input. Suppose the labor wages in a village is for male workers, if it is 400 rupees per day, then if the farmer uses one more labor, additional labor, then he has to spend 400 rupees extra. So he has to incur an additional expenditure of 400 rupees. That is the marginal factor cost. It is the additional cost incurred, additional cost spent when you use one more unit of the labor. That is MFC, marginal factor cost. So is equal to marginal productivity, marginal value product or value of marginal product. What is the value of additional output you get? That is marginal productivity. When the marginal factor cost is equal to marginal productivity, that means when the additional cost you incur, the additional expenditure you incur is equal to additional returns you get, additional income you get. When the two are equal, then the labor employment, the use of labor would be optimum. It is ideal. Okay, that is what the marginal productivity theory says. Suppose the wage is less than marginal productivity. That means the labor wages is only 300 rupees per day, whereas by using one more labor, he gets output which is worth, say, 350 rupees. The wages he has to pay is only 300 rupees, whereas because of use of this additional labor, he gets an additional returns of 350 rupees, 50 rupees more. Then more labor shall be employed, because the two have to be equal for optimality. Okay, the additional cost and additional returns must be equal so that the production will be optimal. So when wages are less, they use more labor. And if the wages are more than the marginal productivity, that means wage you have to pay is 400 rupees. Whereas by using that additional labor, you get an additional returns of only 300 rupees. Then less labor will be employed, because what you lose in terms of cost is less, more than what you gain. So you use less labor. This is marginal productivity, and this reminds us of marginal analysis proposed by Alfred Marshall. Okay. It applies to other factors of production also. Here, as an example, we have used labor. The same holds good for land, capital, as well as management or organization. That is the marginal productivity theory. So here, it is the graphic representation. This curve here, it represents the marginal productivity or the marginal value product curve, MVP curve, this line. Okay. Now, if the marginal productivity is E double prime, okay, if the marginal productivity is E double prime and the wage rate is P, or we can say the marginal productivity is M prime E prime and the wage rate or the price of the factor is OP, then M double prime E prime is greater, marginal productivity is greater than the wage rate. Then more labor will be used. That means instead of M prime, the farmer would use M. OM will be the labor used, so that OP, that is the wages, will be equal to ME, that is the marginal productivity. On the other hand, if M prime E prime is the marginal productivity and OP is the price, then price would be greater than the marginal productivity. When the price is more, that is the wages are more than the marginal productivity, less labor would be used. From M prime, the labor would come down to M. He will use less labor, so he will come back to the optimal condition. That is, the wages, that is MFC, marginal factor cost, is equal to marginal value product. Next, we'll move on to the theory of demand and supply. There is one drawback in the marginal productivity theory, limitation in the marginal productivity theory. The limitation is marginal productivity theory tells us only about how many workers will an employer engages. If the wage is more, he will use less labor. If the wages are less, he will use more labor. So it will tell only how many workers will be employed at a given wage level. So here, wage level we know. If that is the wage rate, then whether he will be using 20 workers or only 10 workers, or he will settle at 15 workers. So how many workers will be used will be indicated by marginal productivity theory. So in order to maximize his profit, that is MFC should be equal to MVP. It does not tell, the marginal productivity theory does not tell us how that wage level is determined. MFC, or in that figure OP, how OP is determined, how the farmers arrive at OP, the wage rate. It is not indicated by the marginal productivity theory. So it is a limitation. It is a drawback of marginal productivity theory. So marginal productivity theory approaches the problem from only demand side and ignores the supply side. Why do we say demand side? How many workers will be employed? How many laborers will be employed? Who employs the laborers? It is the farmer. So farmer demands. So farmer employs. So it is only from the demand side. Whether the workers are ready to work, whether the workers are ready to give up, give out their labor, it is the supply side. But the marginal productivity theory is silent on this aspect. So it ignores the supply side. This lacunae, this limitation is addressed by the demand and supply theory. Now, demand. Demand for a factor is not direct demand. Okay, it is indirect demand, or it is also referred to as the derived demand, derived from other factors. It is obtained from other things. That's why we say it is direct, indirect demand or the derived demand. Now, this indirect demand, what are the factors, okay, which influences the demand for the factors, demand for the inputs? One is the demand for the product. We are not talking about demand for factor here. It is the demand for product. Demand for factor depends on the demand for product. How many laborers you are going to employ depends on, suppose you are a paddy farmer, you are cultivating paddy. Demand for labor depends on the demand for paddy. If the demand for paddy increases, then you will employ more workers. So demand for the product is one factor. Then quantity of other factors required. Now, suppose it is labor, and you have to apply fertilizer, or you have to take up sowing or transplanting of paddy seedlings. Then how much will be the demand for labor depends on how much of fertilizers you have to apply. So quantity of other factors required, how much of fertilizers, how much spraying, how much water to be released, okay, they influence the demand for labor. I'm quoting labor as only one example. It can be any other resource. Then demand price of factor depends on value of the finished product. Suppose it is tomato. The output you are producing is tomato. Suddenly the tomato price in the market comes down. Yes, last week it was 20 rupees per kg. Today it has come down to only 1 rupee per kg at the farm level. Farmer, if he harvests tomato and sell it today, he will get only 1 rupee per kg. But last week, he was getting 20 rupees per kg. So the value of the finished product has come down. Now, Suppose the price of tomato has come down from 20 rupees to 1 rupee per kg. Will the farmer employ workers to harvest by giving 400 rupees per day? Definitely not. He will allow the cows or bullocks to graze tomato in the field instead of spending so much of money on labor payment and getting only less income in the market by selling tomato. So demand price for factor depends on value of the finished product. When the tomato price comes down, there is no demand for labor, the labor wage rate will also come down. So the price of labor will also come down. So demand price of factor depends on value of the finished product. Then coming to supply side, supply of factor depends on size or composition of population. If the population is huge, supply of labor is huge, like in India. Okay, we have huge population, so labor availability is also more. But a country like Canada, the population is less, labor availability will also be less. So one is size. The other one is composition of population. What proportion of the total population is children, youth, aged? At present, India is said to be the youngest country in the world. That means this segment, youth segment, the proportion of youth segment in the total population is maximum in India. Okay, so if the youth segment is more, then, or it is large, then the supply of labor will be more. Then labor efficiency. Okay? If labor efficiency is high, then labor supply will also be high. Cost of education and training. So if here we are not just restricting our discussion to farm labor, we are talking about the general, in general, okay? Cost of education and training. If it is very costly and in a developing country, less people will be educated, less people will opt for training, then less labor would be supplied. Then cost of movement of labor from one place to the other. Okay. Suppose our people, they want to go and work in Gulf countries. So they have to pay so much of money. And if they don't have proper documents, then they will also have to pay extra money to the agents. So all those things. Cost of movement also decides what will be the labor supply in Gulf countries. Okay. So from India, of course, expected income. If the expected income is more, the supply of labor will be higher. In Bangalore city, the labor wages are high compared to villages. So there is migration of labor from villages to the cities because of higher expected income. So supply of labor in cities would be high. Then relative preference for work or leisure. Suppose usually there is a comment on Karnataka labor saying that they prefer more leisure than work, but from the neighboring states, they prefer more work rather than the leisure. It may be true or may not be true, okay? But so whether you like to work, you prefer work over leisure, then supply would increase. If you prefer leisure over work, then supply would be reduced. So this is the graphic representation of demand and supply theory. Okay, so we take wage on the x-axis, y-axis, quantity of factor on the x-axis. Demand curve is negatively sloping because as the price increases, the demand for labor or demand for input would decrease. The farmers would use less inputs if the prices are high. So demand curve is negatively sloping, whereas the supply curve is positively sloping if the wage rate increases or if the price of the factor increases, then more supply would come forth. More workers would come forward to work. So supply curve is positively sloping, and the point of intersection, the point where the demand curve meets the supply curve or the supply curve intersects the demand curve, that point indicates the optimum use of labor, optimum quantity of labor or optimum quantity of labor and optimum wage rate or the optimum price of the input. Suppose the wage rate increases or the price of the input increases, then what happened? The supply would be more than the demand, but the quantity of supply has to be shown on the x-axis. So if the wage line or the price line cuts supply line here, supply curve here, you have to draw a straight line to the x-axis. So this point tells us about the quantity of factor. It indicates the quantity of factor or the labor. So this indicates the demand. Supply is more than the demand. When the supply is more than the demand, naturally the wage rate comes down. So it comes back to R. If the wage rate is less, the price of the input is less, then the demand would be more. Quantity demanded would be more than the quantity supplied. When the supply is less, demand is more, the wage rate or the price goes up till it reaches R on the graph, the point R on the graph. So you will be maintaining that optimality, you will be maintaining that equilibrium level, equilibrium wage rate or equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity of labor or equilibrium quantity of the factor of production, the resource. Price will tend to prevail in the factor market at which the demand and supply are in equilibrium. That's what I mentioned. This equilibrium is at the point of intersection of the demand and supply curves. So this is what I explained previously. Demand and supply curves intersect at the point R, and the price of the factor will be OW. OW will be the price of factor and this OM is the quantity of factor. At OW prime, this is the wage rate or the price. Demand is less than supply. So this is what I explained. This graph I have already explained. So I'll move to the next slide. Concept of wages. Benham defines wages as a sum of sum, a sum of money paid under contract by an employer to a worker for service rendered. If I come and work, I see the name here, Akul Gowda. Suppose I come and work on Akul Gowda's farm, and before I go and work, there will be a contract between me and Akul Gowda. Akul Gowda says, if you work for 8 hours a day, okay, say morning 9 o'clock to evening 5 o'clock, 8 hours, if I come and work on his farm, he would pay me 450 rupees. So that is the contract. A sum of money paid under contract by an employer. Here, Akul Gowda is the employer to a worker, that is me, for services rendered. If I work, if I take up plowing or maybe weeding or spraying chemical on the or insecticide or pesticide on the crop, he will give me 450 rupees for that day. That is the wage. There are two types or classification of wages. One is the nominal wages, the other one is the real wages. Nominal wages and real wages. So this is with respect to labor. So we are talking about the four factors of production. We are starting with labor, then we'll take up land, then capital, and finally management or organization. So nominal wages, it is the wages paid or received in terms of money, that is cash. If Atul Gowda gives me 450 rupees in the evening, that is the nominal wages. Then we have real wages. Real wages is how much of goods and services I can purchase with 450 rupees. That tells us the real wages. Suppose last month the wage rate was the same. Akul Gowda was paying me 450 rupees last month also. Okay. Last month, the price of rice was 50 rupees per kg. So I could purchase with 450 rupees, I could purchase 9 kgs. So 9 kgs of rice was the real wages. Okay, 450 rupees, the nominal wages. 9. Viresh, please mute your microphone. Viresh, please mute your microphone. Viresh. So 9 kgs of rice is the real wages. That was last month. This month, the wage rate has remained the same. Even today, Akul Gowda is paying me 450 rupees, but in the market, the price of rice has gone up from 50 rupees per kg to 60 rupees per kg. Okay, so today I cannot purchase 9 kgs of rice with 450 rupees. It comes down to 7.5 kgs or 8 kgs. So the real wages has come down. Nominal wages, it has remained the same. Last month 450 rupees, this month 450 rupees. So the nominal wages is the same. But the real wages, last month I could purchase 9 kgs of rice. This month I can purchase only 8 kgs of rice. So the real wages has come down. Okay. So goods and services which the money wages can command or money wages can purchase is the real wages. The satisfaction that a laborer gets from spending his money or money wages in the form of necessaries, comforts, and luxuries. So these goods and services, they include the necessaries, the comforts, and the luxuries. What are necessaries, what are comforts, and what are luxuries? We have already discussed. Okay. So concept of rent. This is with respect to land. Rent is the sum of money a tenant periodically pays to his landlord for the use of a piece of land. Okay. A sum of money a tenant periodically pays to his landlord for the use of a piece of land. Suppose Viresh is the landlord. He has land and I am the tenant. I lease in land from Viresh. Okay. I lease in land from Viresh and I cultivate the land. For that, I pay 10,000 rupees per acre every year to Viresh. That is the rent. A sum of money a tenant periodically pays, periodically, usually it is annual. Suppose it is a building, then it would be every month. Okay, tenant periodically pays to his landlord for the use of a piece of land. Again, there are two types here. Okay, one is economic rent. Economic rent is that part of the total payment which is made for the use of land alone. If I pay 10,000 rupees to Viresh every year per acre for the use of land alone, then it is called as economic rent. Then what else could be there? Now, suppose Viresh says, Srikanmurthy, you are finding it very difficult to cultivate your land because of scanty rainfall, or we don't know when the rains will come, we don't know when there'll be drought. Okay, it is very uh, unpredictable. Rain is very unpredictable. So I'll help you. I will drill a bore well. Okay, I will drill a bore well. You can use that water and cultivate the land. Now, when Viresh drills a bore well and he provides me, he facilitates irrigation, will the land rent be the same as 10,000 which I used to pay earlier? No, definitely it will be more than 10,000. He may demand 15,000 rupees. Okay, so when that additional 5,000 rupees is paid because of the investment made by Viresh, it is not economic rent. Economic rent will be only 10,000 which I'm paying for the land. Okay, so without including interest on capital invested. That is, borewell drilled by Viresh is the capital invested. For that, I have to pay the interest. For that, I have to make additional payment. So this is not included in the economic rent. Then, contract rent. Contract rent includes the rent for the land plus interest for the capital invested. Together becomes the contract rent. So the total payment by the tenant to the landlord that includes economic rent as well as interest on capital invested in on land. For example, what I mentioned earlier, the investment on borewell. This is in brief about the concept of rent. I hope it is clear to you. Then concept of interest. This is for capital. We started with labor, then we continued with land, and now we have come to the capital. Concept of interest. Alfred Marshall, he defines interest as the price paid for the use of capital in any market. Price paid for the use of capital in any market. So again, classification of interest into two. One is the net interest or the pure interest. Payment made purely for the use of capital. You have, I see the name Likita here. Likita lends me 1 lakh rupees. Okay, Likita lends me 1 lakh rupees for land development. And she says, you have to pay me 10% interest. Okay, now 10% of 1 lakh rupees is 10,000 rupees. Okay, so that 10,000 rupees which I pay to Likita is the pure interest or the net interest. Okay. Now, the other one is the gross interest. Okay. Gross interest, it includes amount of money paid to the creditor, that is net interest, plus insurance against risk. Okay. Insurance against risk. She may say 10% is the practice in the village, 10%. So you have to pay me 10%, but that will not be sufficient. Likita says, because the agriculture sector is not in good condition now. That is her perception, just for an example. So it is not in good condition. So what is the guarantee that you'll get 1 lakh rupees returns and you will pay back 1 lakh rupees along with 10,000 rupees interest? So there is risk involved in that. So as an insurance against risk, you have to pay more. And reward for management, I have to look after everything, I have to help you, you have to pay me more. Payment for inconvenience. So I have to come again and again. I have to come to your farm, approach you every 3 months, every 4 months, and ask you to pay the interest, pay the principal amount. It is an inconvenience to me. So instead of 10%, you have to give me 15%. So that 5% additional, it covers the insurance against risk, reward for management, and payment for inconvenience. Okay, so all of them put together is gross interest. The actual interest payment for capital is net interest, and the additional payment you have to make, if it is added to net interest, it becomes gross interest. And finally, it is management or organization. That is the concept of profit. Profit is the reward for the entrepreneurial functions. What are the entrepreneurial functions we have discussed earlier? Okay, initiation and all those things. Okay, control and bearing risk and all those things. Okay, so entrepreneurial functions, reward for the entrepreneurial functions of decision making and risk bearing. Mainly decision making and risk bearing. For that, whatever reward has to be paid to the entrepreneur is the profit. So again, classification, two types here, pure or net profit. It is the reward for purely entrepreneurial functions. Okay, these functions, purely for these functions executed by the entrepreneur. Then gross profit. It is the reward for entrepreneurial functions, that is the net profit or the pure profit, plus rent for the land owned by the entrepreneur. Suppose I see the name Gavi Siddesh Patil here. Okay, I have taken 5 acres of land on lease from Gavi Siddesh Patil, and I also own 10 acres. So I own 10 acres and I take 5 acres on lease from Gavi Siddesh. Okay, so rent paid for the land owned by the entrepreneur. Now I have to pay rent to Gavi Siddesh. Similarly, as an opportunity cost for calculating the cost of production, I should consider the rent for land owned by me. Okay, so that is an opportunity cost. Actually, I don't make any payment, but it is only considered for calculating the cost of production. It is the opportunity cost. So opportunity cost of land. Then interest on entrepreneur's capital, that is the opportunity cost of capital owned and invested by the entrepreneur. So what is the other one? The capital. Suppose I borrow money from some other name. Okay. I see the name Chetan AM here. Okay. So suppose I borrow 50,000 rupees from Chetan AM. I have to pay him interest. But along with 50,000 rupees, which I have borrowed from Chetan AM, I am investing 1 lakh rupees on my own. So I have to calculate the interest on 1 lakh rupees I am investing. I am not paying it to anybody, but it has to be considered for calculating the cost of production, that is the opportunity cost of entrepreneurs' capital. Similarly, wages of management by entrepreneur. Since I work on my own farm, okay, suppose Ashoka comes and works on my farm, I have to pay him wages. Similarly, I also work on my own farm. I don't have to make the payment, but for the cost of production purpose, I have to consider my wages also. So that is the opportunity cost of labor of the entrepreneur. So opportunity cost of land, opportunity cost of labor, opportunity cost of capital, plus the profit that is expected by the entrepreneur. All of them put together is gross profit. From the gross profit, if you deduct the net profit, or sorry, the profit that is expected by the farmer, then you get the net profit. This is, I hope, in brief about. Any questions you can ask me, otherwise I'll move to the next chapter. Shall I move to the next chapter? Is the slide visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. The next chapter is demand. Usually, when we talk about demand in the ordinary language, what is demand? Anusha LS, what is demand? Forget it. I'll continue with this. Demand means desire. Okay, demand means desire, but desire itself, ಆಸೆ, ನನಗೆ 1-2 ಎಕರೆ ಜಮೀನ್ ಬೇಕು ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಆಸೆ, ನನಗೆ 1 kg ಬಂಗಾರ ತಗೊಳ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಆಸೆ. I desire to purchase 2 acres of land. I desire to purchase 1 kg of gold. That is the demand in ordinary language. But in economics, mere desire doesn't mean demand. Okay? In the economic sense, desire is not demand, because for the desire to become demand, I should have the capacity to purchase. I should have the money to purchase. I should have the willingness to purchase. Then only desire becomes demand. But mere desire doesn't constitute demand in the economic sense. Mere desire doesn't become demand in the economic sense. So demand, when we say demand, it It should satisfy three conditions. One is desire for a commodity. I should want to buy something. I want to buy something. It is desire. Second one is willingness to pay. I should be ready to pay money to purchase it. Suppose uh, you want to have some coffee or some snacks or your breakfast in, say, Windsor Manor Hotel. You want to have breakfast in the Windsor Manor Hotel. And you check in the internet how much it costs to have breakfast in Windsor Manor Hotel. And it says 2000 rupees. If you pay 2000 rupees, you can have breakfast in Windsor Manor Hotel. One day, okay? It is not for the entire month. Only one day for 2000 rupees. You have, okay? Every month, suppose every month, your parents send you or transfer 3000 rupees to your bank account in GKVK. Now, the breakfast costs 2000 rupees. You have 3000 rupees with you. But will you be ready to pay 2000 rupees for a breakfast one day? Because you have to manage the whole month with that 3000 rupees. So though you have the money, you're not willing, you'll not be ready to pay 2000 rupees. So one is you should have the desire. The other one is you should have the willingness. You must be ready. And the third one is ability to pay. You should have the money. Only when a person desires, he is willing to pay, and he has the ability to pay, then his desire becomes demand. Okay? So in the economic sense, demand for a commodity is the desire for that commodity backed up by, supported by willingness and ability to pay. Willingness to pay and ability to pay. So only when the desire is supported by, backed up by willingness to pay and ability to pay, your desire becomes demand. Okay? Demand has no meaning without the reference of price and period. Okay? The other condition, the demand is always at a price. When the price of mangoes, suppose it is Mallika variety of mangoes, if the price of mango is 150 rupees, then I will purchase 10 kgs. If the price of Mallika variety of mangoes, it comes down to 100 rupees per kg, then I will purchase 25 kgs. If the price of Mallika goes up to 200 rupees or it becomes 200 rupees, then I'll purchase only 2 kgs of mangoes. So demand is always related to price and always related to period. 100 rupees per kg. When I am ready to purchase 10 kgs, if the price is 100 rupees per kg, when? Today. Tomorrow the condition may change. So it is always at a price, always during a given period. So the definition of demand is, demand for a commodity is a schedule. Schedule is a table which shows the price and the quantity demanded. If the price is 10 rupees, I'll purchase 10 kgs. If the price comes down to 8 rupees, then I'll purchase 20 kgs. If the price comes down to 5 rupees, then I'll purchase 50 kgs. So this table is the schedule. It is a schedule of quantities that buyers would be willing to purchase at different prices. 10 rupees per kg, 8 rupees per kg, 6 rupees per kg, 4 rupees per kg, and so on, at different prices at a given period of time. When? Today, or when? This week. Okay, so at a given period of time in a given market, where? Bangalore, Mysore, or Kalburgi, or Vijaypura. Where? Because the prices and quantity demanded, it varies from place to place, market to market. So when we say demands, when we have to define demand, then the quantity, the price, the period, and in which market, keeping everything else constant. Ceteris paribus. Okay, I repeat, demand for a commodity is a schedule of quantities that buyers would be willing to purchase at different prices at a given period of time in a given market, keeping everything else constant, or ceteris paribus. Demand is always at a price. Demand is always per unit of time, either per day or per week, per month, or per year. Okay, it is always per unit of time. Demand price, average revenue, they're related. Demand price and average revenue, they are closely related. And in this slide, I'll also explain about the demand function. Okay, so first, demand price and average revenue. Price is from the point of view of one person. The same price will be revenue. Revenue is income. Okay, income for the other. We are talking about, one is the consumer and the other one is the supplier or the seller. Price is for the consumer. Price is for the common man. Okay, and revenue is for the supplier or the seller. From the point of view of the seller, the demand price is the price which a consumer is ready to pay. Demand price is the average revenue or revenue per unit or income per unit, income per kg or income per liter, or income he expects, the seller expects to earn from the sale of a unit of the commodity. Okay, suppose I am ready to pay 100 rupees per kg. For me, it is demand price. But for the mango seller, the same 100 rupees is revenue or the income. Okay. Thus, demand price is identical with average revenue. They are same. Average revenue for the seller, average price for the buyer, purchaser. Okay, or the price for the demand price for the purchaser. That is why demand curve is also drawn as AR curve. So demand curve is also called as AR curve. Demand curve from the consumer's angle, AR curve from the supplier's angle. Then we'll move on to the demand function. Demand is basically a price quantity relationship. If the price is 10 rupees, so many kgs. If the price is 15 rupees, so many kgs. So it is the relationship between price and quantity. Hence, demand function is an equation expressing the mathematical relationship between the quantities demanded of a good or service and its various prices. So demand function is an equation which indicates the relationship between price of the commodity and the quantity of the commodity purchased in a given market at a specified time period, ceteris paribus, keeping everything else constant. So in the next slide, we'll have an example for demand function. QDX is equal to, this is the general form of a demand function. QDX is equal to A minus BPX. So this B is always having the negative sign. Negative sign because there is an inverse relationship between the quantity demanded and price of the commodity. DX QD is the quantity demanded of commodity X. PX is the price of X. So there is an inverse relationship between the price and the quantity. When the price increases, we purchase less. When the price comes down, we purchase more. So there is an inverse relationship. When one increases, the other decreases. So this is negative here. Okay. So where QX is the quantity demanded of commodity X. A is constant or the intercept. Okay, so it is the A is constant, so it is the quantity demanded when the price is zero. Okay, so when the price is zero in this equation, when the price is zero, BPX becomes zero. If the price is zero, BPX becomes zero, then QDX is equal to A. QDX becomes equal to A. So A is the quantity that is purchased when the price is zero, and it is the intercept, it is a constant, it doesn't change. B is the slope of the demand curve. Demand curve is negatively sloping. The slope of the demand curve is B, it is negatively sloping demand curve. Px is the price of commodity X. This is the demand function. Demand schedule, I'll explain this and I'll wind up. I have 2 more minutes. Demand schedule is a table showing the quantity demanded of a commodity in a given market at a specified time period over a range of possible prices. A table showing various prices, various quantities purchased in a market during a specified time period. The other conditions of demand remaining unchanged, that is ceteris paribus. Okay, so this is how a demand schedule looks like. These are the various prices and the quantity demanded at various prices. The same equation, okay, suppose we use the same equation, QDX is equal to A minus BPX, then 8 here is the quantity purchased when the price is zero, it is the intercept. It is a constant, 8, 8, 8, and so on. QDX is equal to A minus BPX. Okay, here 8 minus 8, B is considered as 1 here. Okay, so when the price is 8, 8 minus 8, quantity 0. When the price comes down to 7, 8 minus 7, 7 into 1, B is 1 here. 7 into 1, 7, 8 minus 7, 1, 8 minus 6, 2, price 5, 8 minus 5, 3. When the price becomes 4, 8 minus 4, 4, and so on. So different prices, various quantities demanded at these prices in a given market at a specified time period. This is your demand schedule. I stop here. If you have any questions, you can ask me. If you have any questions, you can ask me. If you don't have any questions, Then be safe, be at home. Okay, ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲಿರ್ರಿ, ಆರಾಮಾಗಿರ್ರಿ, ಅನವಶ್ಯಕವಾಗಿ ತಿರುಗಾಡಬೇಡಿ, ಮನೆಯವ್ರನ್ನ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ನೋಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ. ಓಕೆ
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
ಬಾಯ್ ಬಾಯ್
Bye, sir.
everybody.
Bye.
Record.